Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Marine Doctor's YouTube channel's podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about several different things. I've got some questions that have been coming in that I would like to address, and maybe we'll get some live questions from you guys. Let's start off the day with fella wrote in and he said, "Carb help, please. This weekend, I took all 6 of my carbs off to rebuild and clean on my 1995 175 horsepower Evinrude. While I was cleaning the float bowls, I noticed what looked to be dried gas around the little brass BB. I took out a dental pick and cleaned out all the junk, but when I put them all back together, they are all leaking around the BB. What is the purpose of the brass BB? If it is just a plug, can I take the BBs out and put in a small brass machine screw with sealant so I won't have to buy 6 new bowls, or maybe just put sealant around the BBs? Any help would be appreciated. Thanks, Robert." Okay. So when they build these carburetors, they can cast them out of plastic or they can make them out of aluminum. And aluminum specific, we'll start with those. So what they'll do is they'll take and they'll drill the channels, and then they have to cap them off. And in those cases, they'll use frost plugs. So those are little aluminum discs that they would put in place, tap with a hammer or a punch of some kind, and spread them out, which then seals that channel off. In the case of the plastic ones, it's treated much the same way. It's a channel that they've created that they need to seal off with that BB. So they'll put a sealant on the BB, basically stick it in, glues itself in place. So what can we do? We can remove that BB, but we might actually destroy some of the plastic and create further problems for ourselves. Or we can put a sealer on the outside now, an epoxy that would be okay against the use of fuel, so that fuel doesn't destroy it. We could, again, as Robert had mentioned, maybe take those plugs out and thread the hole and cap it off that way with a sealer. All of those are very good options. Let's see here. Next question. A few years ago, I went from a 70 horsepower to my current 115 horsepower. It's a 1984 E115 TL-CRD. It ran great when I bought it and still does, but I don't know how a 115 should run. So for the heck of it, I checked the compression. The compression on the cylinders were 90 through 105, and all within a few pounds of each other. Is this normal for the motor? Okay, so I get this question a lot when I'm at the shop. Customers either call in or they show up and stand on the other side of the counter and they ask, "Hey, these are my compression numbers." I always state this at the very start. I trust my compression gauge. I don't know anything about your particular gauge. Your 105 could be my 130. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that my 130 is exactly 130. I'm just saying that I base all my information off my equipment that I'm used to using. So, with saying that, he could come in with his compression at 90 through 105, and I could come up with something, for example, like 130, 130, 130, 115. Okay, so not long ago, maybe a couple weeks ago, I think I did a video on this particular problem. Not this question, but this particular problem where we had a variance in the compression. So he's got 90 through 105, which is 15 pounds difference. I saw 130 and I think it was 110. I'm not 100% sure. It might have been 115. But that was a suspect for me. So what I did was I pulled the heads off, because that's the easiest way to check this problem, and looked inside to verify that everything was okay inside. And in fact, it was not. There was a broken ring. So we can still blow fairly decent numbers, but the primary or the secondary ring can still be damaged. And it's very misleading when we see numbers like 90 through 105. The engine could be fine. The engine could be wearing. We do see a variance of 15 pounds PSI difference. The engine itself could be in really bad shape. It's hard to say. What I would recommend this person do is, for the heck of it, it's not expensive, pull the heads off, peek inside, just so that they know. Now, they're also stating that it appears to run normal, but we don't know what their normal is. Maybe they've gone from a 70 to 115, so they're seeing maybe a 10 mile an hour difference when they should see a 20 mile an hour difference. We don't know this. So a little more information would have been better, but we answer the questions as we get them. Next up, we've got a 150 Black Max. So it's an oil-injected version. It's on a 20-foot Wellcraft. When it's not in gear, it seems to run fine and will accelerate in RPM. However, when in gear, it will not accelerate properly and lacks power. It won't power the boat past about 10 to 15 miles per hour. Normally, this engine will push my boat 40 to 45. Occasionally, when not in gear, I increase the RPM, I get a beep beep. So this is occasionally that this happens. That stops when the RPM is reduced. What does this sound mean? I have checked the plugs and all appear to be getting ample oil. In fact, it seems to be running rich, and there's more smoke than normal on startup. Can you provide any advice for what could be wrong? There are a number of things that can cause these issues. One, spark. The other, compression. These are easily tested. Pull the spark plugs out, throw a compression gauge in, spin it over, compare the values, just like the person did in the question just before this, where they had 90 through 105. If we can find the base of compression, we can start there before we start spending money on anything else. We don't want to spend money on anything else if we've got mechanical damage already, because you're just putting lipstick on the pig. It's not going to fix it. It's going to give you heartache. It's going to cost you money, and it's going to be wasting your time. And I run across this many times with customers that bring their boats in because they finally just throw their arms up in the air and they say, I'm done. They give up. So we start with compression on this particular engine. We check for spark to make sure that we've got spark on all 6 cylinders. He's saying that the engine, I think his plugs are coming out wet, or no, he says that they're getting oil. So we know that fuel is getting through, but are we burning that fuel? Okay. We could also have another problem with the stator. The high side of the stator could be shot, and it's limiting the RPM to a lower amount as well as the speed. I don't think that this engine has in-gear protection, so I don't think that that would be an issue. In-gear protection would be a little device that lets the engine know, or the ECM know, that it's in or out of gear. If that's the case, Optimax, for example, if we rev those engines up and that switch isn't working properly and it doesn't recognize that it's in gear, it'll limit the RPM to 3,000 and set off an alarm. It could have a rev limiter that's built into it, or not built into it, a little box that sits there that could be causing issues as well. But when they say occasionally, usually when the rev limiter goes, it just plain goes. On a side note, I haven't seen this with Mercury product, but I've seen it with Johnson's and Evinrude's. If the voltage regulator fails, okay, and the RPM is raised, the voltage spikes and it sets off the alarm. I don't know if it's something that's built into Evinrude and Johnson to have this happen, but I've seen it in the past, but it doesn't limit RPM. So I'm just kind of throwing that in there as it's a variable that might be causing that beep, beep, beep that this person is hearing. But beep, beep, beep is something that we want to check into, because if it's a low oil alarm, for example, or a no oil alarm, we definitely want to get on top of that as quick as we can. So if that beep, beep, beep is causing issues and the plugs are coming out wet and it's not burning the fuel properly, again, running rich as there's more smoke, we want to then jump back and we want to check that compression again to make sure that that engine is sound before we carry on. One other thing to add, likely isn't this, but I've seen it in the past, where there's the exhaust tube that goes down to the bottom to feed the exhaust out. I've actually seen those melt. And when they melt, they block off the airflow of the exhaust and stifles the engine around 3,000 RPM. All right, next, person purchased a 5 liters of 2-stroke Quicksilver oil for the motor last week. They're afraid to ask this question, but they did. Remember, there's no bad questions, people. There's a lot of personal opinions that come with oil, and they're opinions, they're not fact. You know, the guy at the lake said, or I know a buddy who did this, or so on and so forth, okay? Has anyone ever used that type of 2-stroke oil in a Yamaha is the question. And they want to know, over time, is there a risk of not using Yamalube versus using Mercury's synthetic blend or synthetic oil, I believe they had, right? Or am I just jumped ahead? Yamalu. No, sorry. It's just regular Quicksilver motor oil. Okay. Right off the hop, you're not going to see much difference in performance, if any, and you're not going to hurt the engine. What they're going to say is all the oils are formulated for particular engines so that they run best at any given RPM or idle, and they clean better, and they do this and they do that. More expensive oils typically have a lower amount of ash in them, which creates a higher flash point so that the oil doesn't burn off as easily as it goes through and goes into the intake of the engine. Sorry, through the intake into the combustion chamber of the engine. So if we have, for example, an engine that's running hotter than normal, a high ash content oil, which, for lack of a better place or better type of oil, old TCW2 instead of TCW3 would cause issues for engines that are running today, and that's why it was formulated different to be used in the fuel that they're using now, right? When lead was taken out, they had to revamp fuel. And Turleen, I think was that another? I think that was in there as well. I can't remember for sure what the other name was. But back on track here, the oil's not going to cause an issue. In fact, when I do engine rebuilds at the shop, every engine I do, doesn't matter the brand, I tell them, I want you to run Mercury's synthetic blend oil in there because I know of the cleaning additives and it's a really great product. And I want you to stick to one oil and never mix them. So buy enough oil at the start of the year in case you can't find it later, because we don't want you adding two oils together. That can cause issues. All right. Next question that we have to deal with today is someone put a screw through their tri-hull. All right. Fiberglass. Amazing, super strong. It's slick. It's fast. In some cases, it's decently light. Okay, so they've got a tri-hull fiberglass boat. It's a 1987 Buccaneer. I was replacing the floor, and I've punctured the hull in the front, and a screw is sticking out about half an inch. The screw is still in it. The boat is not leaking as it is, but I certainly don't want to leave it like that. My question would be, what do you do to repair this hole? It would appear they don't have a lot of experience in fiberglassing, and they even mentioned silicone. So number one, silicone is no. Okay. The correct way to do this would be to pull out the floor, put glass matting on the inside, resin it in place, then fix it from the outside so that we make sure that it doesn't leak. In most cases, the owner's not going to do this. Okay. So the cheap, inexpensive way to attempt to fix this, but it's not guaranteed to work. I know, nothing's ever guaranteed. Sand the outside around the hole, take the screw out, sand the outside around the hole, fill the hole with fiberglass putty, or fiberglass, and then take and finish the outside with gel coat. Gel coat is that smooth finish that they've used on the outside. So I don't think that they've done anything structurally. It's just a hole. But again, the best way to fix it would be to glass it from the inside or mat it from the inside, put resin on it, seal it up, and then finish from the outside. But one thing I want to make note of, if you do finish it from the outside, you're going to be pushing fiberglass into the hole. It should go out and it should mushroom somewhat and seal. So, that's, I want to say that would be a 75-80% fix, not 100% fix, but it's still going to work. Adjusting the linkage. Oh, sorry. On to the next question. I hope that was enough of an answer for that. I don't do a lot of fiberglass at the shop anymore because of the issues with fiberglass and fumes and so on and so forth. So I tend to stay away from that, but hopefully that was good enough. Adjusting a linkage on a 9.9 when in neutral still clicks a bit, like it's ever so slightly engaged. How do we correct this? All right. So when someone takes and they change out their impeller, for example, or they're working on their water pump, what we'll do is they'll take the gear case off, and sometimes the shaft that goes up and down, the shift shaft, can change. Some of them are screwed in place. There's no issues. Some of them spin. So when they spin, we can either increase or decrease the distance that we're actually pulling that the shifter up and down, which moves that clutch back and forth. In an instant like this, where it's just ever so clicking, sometimes what we can do is, if we come out of forward, we can just lightly go back in reverse, not into reverse, but slightly move it back, and then let it come forward. That'll take it out of gear. Should be fine. If you want the proper fix, you're going to have to do some adjusting. So you're either going to have to lengthen that shift shaft or shorten the shift shaft, turn it back to where it was, or if it's a Johnson, for example, away from Yamaha, just for a split second here, on some of the models, they've got a little linkage that sits down there. And what a lot of people will do when they put that linkage back together with these two rods meet, a little higher, two rods meet like this, and you have to fire screws through, they won't line the rods up properly, and it'll be like this rather than like this, which lengthens the rod and then doesn't shift. The Yamaha, I suspect, probably spun. Or, well, yeah, it would have spun, because they've got that little piece in there that just slides up and down, which pushes the pin and moves the shifter back and forth. So they'll probably have to take the gear case off, spin it one or two times each way, or half a turn, whatever it takes, put it back on, and see if it shifts. Trial and error. It's going to be what it is. Sometimes it's a pain in the arse, sometimes it isn't. Okay. On to the next question from Don G. Don G used to be here a lot of years ago. Question is it okay to use synthetic oil in an older engine? I have a 1982 Johnson 140 and was wondering if it will be good or bad to use synthetic oil as 50-to-1 mix. Thanks. It's not going to hurt it one bit. The engine's not really going to notice a difference, other than it might run a little bit more cleaner. We're not going to gain any more power. It's going to be fine. If you can find synthetic oil, or if you can find a decent TCW3 oil to put in there, even Johnson Evinrude, Mercury, Yamaha, Suzuki, any of their entry-level grade oils would be perfectly fine. So yes, definitely you can use synthetic oil in there. That's not going to cause a problem. Okay, just give me a sec here. I want to get caught up. All right, I just got to bring up some more questions. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in. I'm happy to answer them for you. I know this is the first time that we're doing this in a long time, and well, you know what? Maybe I don't have to answer questions all the time. Let me tell you about the day I had. The day I had the other day when the fellow brought his boat in, and it was filled with pigeon poo. I know. It sounds like a lot of fun, and it is. We would really appreciate when people would bring stuff in that would be clean, but it's the beginning of the year. I understand it was stored on a Quonset. I'm not super busy. I couldn't turn them away. You know, those types of things. So it is what it is. But yeah, it was quite a mess, and unfortunately, it was taking an engine off and putting a new engine on and running control cables, and it was installing an electric trolling motor. It was a lot of inside the boat stuff. It was pretty gross, but happily, yesterday my son came in and gave me a hand with it, and we got it all finished up. So yeah, it's not like being a marine technician is all about excitement and working on boats. So obviously it's working on boats, but not in that fashion where it's, hey, this is a great time all the time. I really like doing it, but there's some jobs that I just don't like doing. I just don't. Some cruiser stuff that I don't like doing would be changing uh, the exhaust bellows on the outside, or the U-joint bellows. I was informed by Mercury, so they've got a sealant that they use to make sure that the exhaust bellows and the U-joint bellows stay in place. And I don't use it. I use crazy glue or an instant glue of some kind. And and I find that a lot of the times, because I'm working underneath this, laying underneath it, arms are up in the air, and I'm fastening everything in place. There's glue dripping everywhere. I usually find that my head gets glued to the floor. So now it's always hat on until such time as I just can't possibly see anymore, or just depending on the situation. But yeah, there's times where I've glued my head down to the floor, glued my head onto the carpet that's below me. Yeah, rip it off and then keep going, right? Yeah. Fun stuff. What's some fun stuff that I like to do? I like to run the engines on the dyno. I like to see the engines run through to completion to know that I did indeed fix the problem. I like to diagnose. I like to figure out what's going on with the engine, why it's not working properly. Every engine has a secret, and you just have to look for it in order to find it. And I shot a video the other day, and a fella had brought his boat in because his fuel pump wouldn't keep working. He bought a new fuel pump. He changed out all the fuel lines. He did a whole bunch of work to it, and his problem could have been solved with a compression gauge. Not really. I don't want to say it would solve it. It would have stopped him from buying all these extra parts and doing all this extra work. So the symptom was his engine or his fuel pump wasn't pumping fuel, and his wife had to sit at the back squeezing the primer bulb to keep the engine running. That's the symptom. The cause was actually the primary ring on the piston wasn't creating a vacuum and being able to pulse the fuel pump anymore. So it didn't matter what the fella did on the outside, it was something that was on the inside. So sometimes you've got to dig a little deeper than what the symptoms actually represent. So the symptom was caused by that problem inside, or mechanical problem inside the engine. It wasn't an external problem, which would have been the fuel pump, say, had a hole in it, or was failing, for example. But a lot of people, they just get caught up, and they just it's like staring at a train wreck. You're going to look at the worst part of the train wreck, and then you're going to focus on that, and that's all you're going to remember. But there's so much other information that's around that a person needs to gather up in order to figure out how to fix things, or how to work through a problem, so that they can understand what's actually going on with the engine at that particular time. Like, for example, an engine could have a rough idle, and a rough idle could be numerous things. Always start with compression and the spark, and then move away from there. But we can have different kinds of idling issues. We could be running a little bit too slow. The timing could be retarded too far. The carburetors could be lean. We could have one carburetor that's lean. We could have sync and link, or link and sync is out of adjustment. We could have the throttle plates offset a little bit, which creates a set of pistons, or bank of pistons that wants to run a little faster than the other ones go, and yeah, that'll give you kind of a bit of a surge and a pop every once in a while. But there's so many things like even with those out of, or throttle plates out of sync there, you could have an engine that wants to race, but it's still going to pop like it's running lean. So then if you play around with the jetting's not going to fix the problem, because that's not the problem. It's just a symptom of the bigger problem, which would have been the throttle plates up in alignment. So whenever I work on Everett and Johnson, after I do a rebuild, Chrysler was really bad for it too. I'll back up. Yeah, Chrysler was really bad for that too. Chrysler and Force. Link those throttle plates all the same at the same time, then rerun the engine to see if the problem goes away before you start yanking carburetors and so on and so forth off. Especially if you've already taken the carburetors off and gone through them, and don't second guess yourself and say to yourself, I didn't clean the carburetors well enough. You probably did. There's just something else that's wrong with that engine at the same time. Excuse me. And also, when you pull off those carburetors, make sure you always peek inside and take a look at the reeds, and make sure that they're seated. If they're not seated properly, we can run into issues. I don't really see a lot of issues with reeds up where I am. The reed problems that I have seen have been physically broken, not worn out, physically broken, where there's pieces that are gone, and once the pieces are gone, it's not going to work properly. And it's an audible change in the sound of that particular carburetor. Oh, here's a nifty little trick that I use at work. So when I'm working, I'm doing a compression test, and let's say, for example, it's a 3-cylinder, so 1, 2, and 3 are the cylinders that'll do. You can hear the amount of compression that's being made. Now, obviously, I've been doing this for a lot of years, so I listen, right, and I listen with my ears to figure some stuff out as I run the engine. So I'll listen for electronics leaking. like spark jumping across, things like that, that you can't see but you can hear. But a compression stroke will make a different noise if there's an issue with the engine. I'm not going to describe the sound, but if you ever have the opportunity and you're going through your tests, you can physically hear a noticeable difference in the tone that cylinder makes. And before I even walk from the front to the back, I know the engine has failed. No, it's not a superpower; it's just experience. I know. I'm not Superman, but that's fine. Gear case problems. Where to start with those? I guess check the gear oil. Always check the gear oil to make sure that there's no filings or water in it. The new oils that are on the market. So I typically will use Mercury's High Performance gear oil is what I'll use. And the reason that I use that particular oil is it's got emulsifiers and tactifiers in it, and they're supposed to adhere to the components better and stop water from making contact with the components. It's beyond my pay grade to know why, but that's what they claim happens. So I kind of steer away now from entry level gear oils for the marine applications and go with the more expensive high performance. Now, another reason that I go with high performance, and I did mention that it's expensive, but the reason that I go with that is you can, most times, if there's no water intrusion and based on the amount of use that you get. So my local area, guys might see 50 hours on their boat tops in a season. Most guys are probably 20. They'll drive to their destination, the 15, 20 miles or whatever it is, turn the boat off, and then they just fish or they troll around. You know, you might be on the water for hours, but you're only using the engine for minimal amount of time. So with the high performance gear oil, we typically can get, and again, as long as it's not leaking, as long as there's no water getting in, we'll get about 3 years out of that oil before it starts to degrade and the green color or bluish green color starts to change. Once it starts to change, it comes out. Until such time as that happens, it's fine to leave it in. The original oils, or the I guess the gold ones though, fail a lot quicker and are more susceptible to water degrading them quicker over time, heat, so on and so forth, causing issues, and it breaks down quicker. But yeah, we can usually get a longer period of time out of the more expensive oil. So it's more expensive at the start, but cheaper later on. And we can also talk about, I use 2540 in majority of our four-stroke outboards and our stern drives in the engines. And the reason that we use 2540 is if there's an issue where the engine floods or water somehow gets into the oil, we've got that heavier oil that's going to stand up longer to those intrusive properties that are now inside that crankcase. And this was actually something that we picked up, or I picked up from Mercury many, many years ago when the Yamaha power heads were causing issues that Mercury was using for their four strokes. And it wasn't the power head itself. Let me back up. The thermostats were failing and the EFI engines were adding too much fuel, and the fuel was getting past, flooding into the crankcase and thinning out the oil. So we were running 1030 at that time. We then bumped up to 2540 for that particular reason. There was a bulletin sent out about the thermostats. If they were marked in blue, I think it was, they'd been changed already from the factory. If they weren't marked in blue, we popped them out, put the new blue ones in, and sent the guy on his way, and, well, obviously changes the oil as well. But yeah, that's why I use 2540. So whether it's a 5 horsepower or a 200 horsepower, whatever it is, 2540 goes into it. Now, questions have been asked earlier about synthetic oils versus regular oils. Now, again, keeping in mind that we don't get a lot of use up here in Canada, my sale to the guy is if you're going to use a synthetic based oil, we can usually get 2 seasons out of it rather than 1. So 1, I want to see him every year to do it. 2, or the more expensive, regular oil, I want to see them every year. Synthetic is every 2 years. I know some guys are going to frown at that. They're going to say it causes issues. Prove it. Answer in my chat. with your information and prove it. If the engine or oil is still gold, it's not breaking down. Once it starts breaking down, it starts to turn black, it comes out. And another thing to keep in mind is how long do people go on their oil after it turns black and it still doesn't cause issues? I know. An ounce of prevention, or was it an ounce of insurance is an ounce of prevention. So I get it. I totally get it. If a guy comes in and he requests, hey, change my oil, I'll change it. If he leaves it up to me and I pull a dipstick and I look at it and I go, this is fine, it's fine and it's staying. I don't like places that do things that they don't really need to do, right? We don't want to spend X number of dollars on a customer that doesn't need to have to spend it. And I think that's one of the reasons why my business here in Canada is doing so well is because I'm honest and I'm transparent and I'm upfront with people. If there's an issue with regards to what does or does not need to be fixed, it gets fixed properly, yes, but not over and above what needs to actually be fixed. It's like, you know, when you go to the you go for an oil change and the technician, he's down in the bottom and he's got very little, if any, experience in brakes, we'll say. But he yells up at the guy up top and he says, yeah, well, they're here. Let them know that the brakes need changing. Well, that's not what I'm here for, right? You know, noticing things that need to be changed is one thing. Writing it on the bill, you know, kind of as a little side column. Hey, by the way, but forcing someone or saying things like, and a great example would be like when we go back to the automotive side with the technician and the whole saying, yeah, you got to get your brakes done because if you don't get your brakes done, you could get into an accident. Selling stuff based on fear or tactics like that shouldn't be in the industry. It shouldn't be in any industry, for example. And kind of a pet peeve. I know I'm off topic, but yeah, I just don't really much care for that kind of stuff. And it's not fair to the individual because you're putting them in a compromising position that they feel that they need to do something and there's no real need to have to do that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap things up for now. I wanted to see how this was going to work. And if we get some follow-up views, that'll be fantastic. If I get some replies down in chat, that would be great. So, as always, like, comment, subscribe. Would really appreciate it. Let's get my channel moving again. I know back in the early, what was it, 2008? When did I start doing videos? When did I start doing YouTube? I don't remember. But yeah, I've actually got some videos that are over 600,000 views, and it would be really nice to get these back up and get popular again. Just got to get that YouTube algorithm to acknowledge that I exist again, and then we'll start rolling, and I can be here for you guys a lot more often. So until such as that time, I'll say goodbye to you guys, and thanks for watching.